itself is not interesting. Language by itself is vocabulary and grammar. So that language you're getting ready to teach has a culture that can get connected to it. So if you're thinking of one of your first units you're going to teach, do you all know what you're teaching or working in, or you have an idea of what might come up early? What you want to do is say, what is that topic? What is the grammar? What is the vocabulary? But what is that product practice perspective? So in this case, the city unit that's posted, the city unit that Donna and I wrote for a book, is posted saying, yeah, we'll talk about the old buildings. We'll talk about their willingness to maintain and keep and not tear down. We'll talk about specialty shops in the center of town and how they still like to go to individual markets. But we'll make sure we show the equivalent of the hypermarché, the Walmart, the huge supercenter too, because if all we do is say, oh, there's all these cute small specialty shops in France and this is where they shop, it's a stereotype. So you're thinking of what am I going to teach and how is that going to be a cultural focus? And sometimes our books don't do a good job on culture at all. They just got hooked up. So with that information in mind, turn and talk for a minute about something you think you'll be teaching this fall. And what is the cultural aspect of it you can bring in? This is real quick for you to say you're going to teach present tense. I don't care. They don't care. They don't care about adjective agreement. They don't care about past tense. They don't care about articles. They don't care what the list of vocabulary is. You're not going to hook them that way. You're going to hook them on the culture that you can connect to that stuff. Because that stuff by itself isn't going to interest most young learners. So turn and talk just a minute. What culture can I do this fall? We're going to have an opportunity to teach for a few minutes. Don't you think your audience would like to learn something about your culture while you're teaching us language? So think about that. How do I bring in something so that I catch them? And my colleague always says, lead with culture. Lead with culture. Now we know that today's learner is a visual learner. High estimates are as high as 80% visual, which means that every lesson needs to start visually. If you think about it, YouTube has become your best hope of hooking today's learner. So to get out there and find that authentic little video, even if they can't understand all of the Russian, their brain is processing the images. And then you can even mute the sound and decide how to use it or what language to put with it. But the fact that you're starting to share the culture. Housing unit that I mentioned earlier, one of the best shows out there. Anybody know what it is? It's on HGTV. I know you're all students and you don't watch TV. International House Hunters. International House Hunters. I think it's fascinating to watch International House Hunters. Anybody watched it? And they're all online. So you just mute the English and you can go through 3 Parisian apartments and see how small they are and how much they cost. So it's hooking them, and then we'll learn the words for kitchen and bedroom and living room and bathroom. But will we be seeing them in a real cultural context instead of a floor plan in the book that anybody could have drawn? A question?
No, just a comment maybe or an addition.
Please.
Speaking of stereotypes, watching this channel and I saw Dar es Salaam and didn't believe that was Dar es Salaam. We don't have those houses there, but yes we do.
You do have them,
Yeah.
because it wasn't something you were maybe aware of,
Yeah.
but here they're filming it in your country.
Exactly.
So it's like, this is a perspective. I mean, they do that one that's, like the billionaire houses here too, and I can watch that, but I don't, because it makes me mad. But I mean, it is a lifestyle in the United States and everywhere in the world, but certainly is not the lifestyle of an educator, as far as I know, in any country of the world. So it's up to us to make that culture come alive. culture hooks them. You want them in your third semester, your fourth semester, your fifth semester, then you've got to make them fall in love with the language through the culture. Because grammar will never, ever, just a few weirdos like us. Just a few, just a few. There's a reason Americans don't speak language, it's how we talk. So if we move on from cultures to connections, the next most important one, that is the notion that when you teach language, you should learn something you didn't know. And when I say something you didn't know, it doesn't just mean new words or grammar. It means information that I didn't have before I took your class. Whether that is a work of art that we're going to talk about and learn about the artist, whether it is a period of history, whether it is a regional food dish from a certain country, I need to learn something. Could I please make an appeal that one of the #1 connections you can make in lower levels is geography? Because your students do not know where places are in the world. And the more often you can design a 101, 102 course to cause them to look in meaningful ways at world maps so that they know where places are, at least if they don't continue in language, they are going to have a better global perspective of the world. So if I'm teaching the days of the week in French, they actually come from the planets. So what I used to do, and I can tell horror stories on how bad of a teacher I was, even in my last year, because I was going to teach till I got it right, but then I realized I was going to die in the classroom. So that's not really the reason why I retired after teaching here in Indiana. But I used to teach the days of the week early in my course, and they would all dutifully learn to say and spell correctly the days of the week. Why? What is a real life context for the days of the week? When do you use the days of the week in your real world communication? Give me a situation.
When you have class.
When you have class, making an appointment.
Yeah.
Do you want to go to the movies on Friday or Saturday? But the one thing no one has ever asked me to do in French, nobody in Paris has ever walked up to me and said, say the days of the week. And saying the days of the week is not a guarantee that they can make plans for the weekend. So this was a waste of time. That I taught my students to say Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. They learned them in order. They still didn't know them. And they couldn't turn them in and say, you want to go to the movies on Friday or Saturday. So you can't teach language without connecting it to the real world and to where things come from. So the planets are just a small example. I can give you a million examples of first level courses, the alphabet. Ask yourself, do you really have to teach the alphabet first? Do they really have to say the ABCs? Really, it's a cognitive dissonance like this huge. Here you've got these big guys sitting in there learning their ABCs. They feel silly. Has anybody ever asked you to say the ABCs? I think it's cute. I have a grandson, he's turning 5. When he could say the ABCs when he was 2.5, I was thrilled. It was age appropriate at 2.5. But no one will ever ask me to say the ABCs. In real life, when do I need my ABCs?
Just spell your name.
Absolutely, to spell my last name. If I travel and I say Terrell, even in the United States, I spell my last name. But if I go abroad, I spell it all the time. And to start to read, if it's a non-Western language, I've got to start to learn my alphabet. So it's just always thinking. So if we make connections, it's really the question, are they using language to learn something? And we say that you connect in 2 ways. You make connections to other disciplines. So if I'm talking about Angers, as soon as I start showing these signs, I'm making a connection to math. Because because the signs are in metrics. So that should be part of my unit when I'm using numbers, not just learning to count to 20, but a context for counting, for looking at numbers to 20. And working with metrics gives them some useful information or different perspectives. So in this unit I put up as a sample, here's France talking about the ideal city. And there are all kinds of infographics. How many of you have discovered infographics? Infographics are your life-saving moment in lower level classes. You should be able, in every language in the room, to type in the word infographic in your language and the topic word in your language and pull up an infographic with pictorial information that will be useful to you as a text you can read. So now I can compare, well, what do they say the ideal city is versus what do we say is the ideal city? Because we have our charts comparing it, we have them. I can talk to my college students about where they want to live when they graduate. What are the qualities that they're looking for in a city when they graduate? What are their type factors? I can compare them to what the French say. So they're learning about how you analyze if you have choice. Obviously, you're going to go where the job is. But if you get 2 job offers, now you're going to be in this situation. So it's a diverse perspective. And it might be interesting to see that Americans want this city, French want this city. That they put this quality above our quality. So it's a connection piece. So in this unit, for making connections, there's geography, there's math, there's language arts for interviewing people. Different perspectives, go to different cities in France, look at their websites. Know that they have different campaigns going on so that you're bringing in, oh, I'm not just learning the words for the city buildings, I'm learning what this means in the context of the French mindset to the best of my ability. So now your unit just got more complex. What is a unit you're teaching early in the year? Call out some of them. Those of you that have taught before. What's on your first semester list of things to teach?
Revision of the previous year.
Okay, so can I just offend anyone in the room that was thinking that way? Here's what I said on Monday to a group of IB teachers. Do not begin the year with review. No review at the beginning of a year. Ever. Ever, ever. Now I can back that statement up. 1, we all know they forgot stuff, right? We just don't know who forgot it. So we're going to assume that everyone in the class forgot everything and teach it again. You happen to be a genius and you didn't forget anything, so you're bored out of your mind. And you happen to be really struggling and you've forgotten nearly everything, and so you're thinking, oh my gosh, maybe I better drop. The truth of the matter is, the amygdala in the brain clouds everything with emotion. So if you start the year, the semester, by reminding them that they don't know anything, they're building a negative mindset to your class right away. So what you do is you start with something new. I have to put my new identity unit in because a lot of you could use it because they're not that different. You start with something that's new, that allows you to build in review as you identify a need for it. Not until you see evidence that they need it do you start to bring the review in. So think that through. Now, besides review, what else are you going to be doing?
Introduction.
Introductions and greetings, of course. What else?
Shopping, home locations, families, relatives.
Shopping, home locations, families, seasons, weather,
Travel.
numbers, travel.
Giving directions.
Now, of all the things that you're going to do, which unit is the most interesting? Because maybe that one's first,
Break.
right after what?
Just,
What did you say, break?
the break, they're just coming from a long break, so probably, yeah, but not at the first level, at the secondary level.
Yeah, I mean, think through that, and how do you take that unit and bring something that has substance into it? So let's pick family. Everybody's probably doing family. Sure, I can learn the words for mother, father, brother, sister. I cannot learn all the words I need. Nor can you give me a list of all the words they need. So, but then what I really want to know is, are families different where you live and where I live? But that's really hard, because what is a typical American family? The only way I could do that is to go get statistics. And the only way you can tell me what a typical Russian family is to give me statistics. Because AARP just published a survey. What percentage of American families today are multi-generational in the United States? What would you say? Americans? 4%? 0? There's a stereotype for you. No, I mean, that's not. 40%. 40% of the families in the United States today are multi-generational. So we can't start saying, but we can make a connection here to actual data if we choose to do so. And that's what we need to do. Why are 40% multi-generational now? Well, we have a changing demographic composition. We have a lot of different ethnic groups, and we've just come through a downturn in the economy where a lot of parents have moved back in with children, children have moved back in with parents, and children are not moving out. So it's changing the composition of the American family. Another statistic that was on there, I won't remember the number exactly, but I think it's 46% of children are growing up in single-parent homes. So when we talk about the nuclear family, it's just not there anymore. So when we teach a family tree of mother, father, brother, sister, that gets really complex. So these are simple little numbers to talk about, but they deepen your curriculum so much when you're working with adults or young adult learners to bring in this type of information. And it's the connection standard that reminds you to do so. So I've been talking for a long time. I'm going to take like a 10-minute stretch break. We're going to take several 10-minute stretch breaks. So feel free to get up, move around, talk this over, and we'll come back and do the other two. Well, you can think about it through the lens of health. How, not just are you thirsty, but to be healthy, how many glasses of water should you drink a day? So now we're getting content information. We're getting actual physical content, things you may or may not know. And we can think about it from a cultural perspective. Where does water come from? What does it mean when I say something as simple as, I'm going to get some water? In the United States, that might mean I'm going into the kitchen to turn on the tap. But in other countries around the world, it's a far more complex process to get water. So everything has the possibility for integration of language, culture, and content. And over break, someone said, well, the Dutchers are using a lot of what I'm saying. And she said, but we did use the Simpsons to talk about the family. That's that missed opportunity for culture. I know the students will like it, because remember, they were high school students last year. But you guys get to grow them up. So always think culture, content, language, how do we put it together? Now the other two C's go much more quickly because they're more self-evident. Comparisons is the idea that you compare cultures or you compare languages. So you make linguistic comparisons. Now ACTFL really strengthened this because a lot of people took linguistic comparisons to be grammar. And that is not the intent of the standards. The standards is to say there are things we say that do not translate easily. So that we need to make sure that we are aware of what those things are and that they get taught and explained. Because sometimes they're pivotal. For example, in Spanish textbooks, in the food chapter, they very often don't give the vocabulary buen provecho. Does your food chapter enjoy your meal. If it doesn't, you're missing an opportunity for a linguistic comparison. How do you say these courtesies? When you sneeze, what do you say culturally? This is very revealing about a culture. I'm supposed to say God bless you, except it doesn't have any real meaning or affiliation with the church at all, unless you look way back linguistically in the past in the history of the expression. The French say, best wishes to you. Why? Those are linguistic comparisons. I always pick on French and Spanish teachers for not teaching I'm full. I don't know what it would be in your language, but if you do a literal translation of I am full in Spanish or French, do you know what you've said? I'm pregnant. So don't you think in the food chapter we might add to the list, I'm full, knowing full well that that's going to happen, instead of just laughing about it? So it's a chance to think about words and expressions that are really important. For example, in French, hôtel de ville. For those of you that don't speak French, you can probably figure out that this is what? Hotel. So imagine making a reservation at the Hotel de Ville. Will it work? No. No, because when you put ville after it, it means it's the city hall. So it should show up as a word that's going to cause confusion. Or the concept of ville fleurie. What the heck is a ville fleurie? A flowered city. Why would they put, obviously it's important, they put it right under the sign for the city, Ville Fleurie. Well, this is a national campaign. Do we have any such thing in the United States? We have tree cities. Watch for the signs. Some cities are tree cities. You have to have a certain number and percentage and types of trees, and then you can be a tree city. What does that show? This is a city that is really concerned about the environment. So it's a language comparison. The other is the cultural comparison. And that one we tend to do without thinking about it. Just be careful, like we said earlier. Look at Paris. Does that look like an animal? The Parisians are very proud that their city is symbolized by an animal. Can anybody see an animal in there? They say it's an escargot. Because, think about it, and these are the kinds of things that are fun to learn. They do arrondissement, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, like this. And here's the head. So it's a snail. And their hopscotch game is not played the way ours is, it's played like a snail. And those are cultural comparisons that relate to language. So you want to really think through the types of comparisons that your unit gives you an opportunity to make. And then communities. This is the one where when they did the research for the revised standards, they said that everybody agreed this is the one we do the worst on. Community says, how do you get your students to use the language outside of the walls of the classroom? It's harder than that even. If you give your students a writing assignment, who is the audience beyond the classroom? If it's worth the time, then reaching out and finding an audience is critically important. Because when they write for you, the teacher, they will not be giving you their best work. They still might get an A. They might meet your expectations. But it's not like they're going to push themselves if they know it's going to go on a blog post that might be read by real Russians. So how do we connect to the community? How do we bring that community into our classroom? How do we use our native speakers in meaningful ways in the classroom? So it's really thinking through, getting beyond the school. What do we do? How do we connect? And so thankfully for technology now, because I was out of the classroom for 10 years as a supervisor over in St. Louis, and then I came back and taught for a year here in Indiana. And people would say to me, well, what was the biggest difference in 10 years? The biggest difference in 10 years was the ability to bring real French into the classroom just by Googling the night before. Just by Googling. So you're getting ready to teach a poem? Type in Google. Some parent, if it's really a meaningful poem, has recorded their child reciting it. There's something out there, if it's meaningful. If you Google some poem that you're teaching and nothing comes up, you might want to drop that poem from your curriculum. Because no longer is it seen as very relevant to the real world, to the speakers of that language. So it helps you. You need a song? Go get the top 10 list of the songs in your country. You don't have time to do that? Make it an assignment. Tell them they have to listen to one of the top 10 songs for homework and bring it in if they really like it. Make that their homework, that they have to do that. Because that's the relevant language, getting them outside of the room to make sure they know that what you're teaching in class is happening out there. If you are a native speaker, they already believe that you speak the language. I, as a non-native speaker, they were never really sure I spoke French. I mean, I did. I spoke French to them every day. But they had no real evidence that my French was French. Until a real French person would come into the classroom and we would speak French. And I would have students say to me, you really do speak French. Now remember, they're only 3 months older when they leave me and get into your class. So they need to know that what you are doing is real. And if you're not a native speaker, they're not sure you're all that good. They have no basis of comparison. So they're going to look at you as a non-native speaker of Russian and think, who is she to teach me Russian? Is her Russian really good? And not until they hear you speaking Russian to someone else are they going to give you the credence that you can really be an actual Russian speaker. The last one I really do want to talk to you about a little bit. They shifted this one. And this is the notion of personal learning. Lifelong learning. And what we know from research now is your students need to know what the goals of your class are. And they deserve an opportunity to think about how well they are meeting those goals. So when I sit down in your class, first day, what are you going to share with me that tells me what I will be able to do by the end of the semester? What are you handing me? What are you putting on your Blackboard or whatever system you use down here now that says to me, by the end of this semester, you will be able to, and fill in the blank.
It's on the syllabus, right? I mean, you put it on the syllabus.
And is it written in the terms of what you will do in the real world? So if you have those goals clearly stated, then the question becomes, how often in class do you go back to those and ask them to self-assess where they are? Or is it on the syllabus and you're trusting them to look at it again? Because what the research is saying about learning is that if you don't know the goal and you don't constantly measure where you are personally in meeting that goal, you're less likely to get there. Then the second question is, I come into your Russian class, you're going to speak Russian 90 to 100% of the time, and I'm a novice. I don't know any Russian. Where is the goal visible for that day? Where will I see your posted goal? Because I need those two pieces to focus my learning. And that's this notion of the actual can-do statements. And we're going to look at those in a little bit. But I have to tell you how well I want you to be able to hit your unit goals. And when you see me teach later, I will be demonstrating what I mean by that. So now I have a little assessment for you. You have in your folder this information. It's not in color, but you have the one-page handout, the review of the standards. And when we say the goals, it's the 5 goals, and the 5 goals have 11 standards. So sometimes those 2 words, I even mix them up. But it's 5 goals, 11 standards. And I'm going to give you a task where this is a unit on city. It's a unit you said you teach, that you get them acquainted with the city. So in this particular unit, designed for a novice level, could be adapted. I picked this one because I know it can be adapted to university if they're beginners. Students will have the opportunity to explore the city of Angers from the point of view of someone who might select Angers as a tourist destination. They will work with various texts that share information on Angers. They learn more about the city and will take a virtual tour of the chateau, comparing that site with others they may have visited. They will compare Angers to their city and other cities that are of interest to them. They will be able to identify features common to most cities and places and things to do that make Angers unique. They will be able to get around the city, asking for and explaining where they are going and why they are going there. Working in small groups, they will research other cities, making comparisons to their own city and Angers. They will consider designations that indicate that cities are unique in other countries, and they will talk to others to plan a vacation. Someone said vacation earlier. So working with your partner and looking at that description of a unit, find evidence of the 5 C's. Find the evidence that I have created a standards-based unit. Okay, understand the task? Because we have to prove, we very often have to prove that we're standards-based in K-12. So we have to write documents for the state like this. So when you think about saying, well, what is French 3 in a K-12 setting, you would be putting together a series of units that are hopefully backed by this type of description. I know you don't have to do that, so you can say, well, this is too much work. And it is. So if you don't have to do it, I don't think you have to polish it like this. But in your brains, you have to be able to see that you've made these connections.
Actually, recently, we've been forced to do this.
Well, good.
Even at this level. The assessment, right? Those of you who participated in the assessment, right? So we are told to talk about the outcomes of our courses, and that has to be
Okay, I mean, because I think otherwise it becomes all these disparate things and we lose sight of the big picture. Because there's so much that goes into learning a language that we can get focused on the nitty-gritty details, like is the accent on the word or not, when that doesn't matter because native speakers aren't using them anymore. And we lose sight of, can you do anything? So let's see how we did. We'll set aside communication, because how do you write any unit that doesn't have communication in it? So what about cultures? Where is evidence of cultures, products and practices connected to perspectives? Who saw cultures in there? No culture in this unit? I failed. Okay, so we're going to visit the chateau because that happens to be one that has an online virtual museum, so I can take them to the chateau. So that's what we'll do. That's a cultural product. Are there any cultural practices that we're looking at?
To compare,
What are we comparing?
they will compare Angers to the city.
To other cities. So we're looking at practices. What do cities have in common, both within France and in comparison to their own city? How does it compare? Are we making connections? Are they learning other disciplines or other perspectives? What are they learning in terms of another discipline? Geography. History. So you can see that they're going to get some information. It's not a lot, but some. Remember, this is a 101 type unit. What about comparisons of language and culture? That came through with what you already said. What about the community?
They're going to ask it says they're going to ask for directions and stuff like that.
Okay, and somebody asked me, how are they going to do that? Well, the best way to do is take Google Earth and put them on a street corner and hand them a map of Angers and tell them to ask for directions to the library, because they can be standing on a virtual corner and have to do it. Notice that it says that they're going to ask for directions, but it doesn't say that they're going to give directions. Why? Because no one approaches a non-native speaker and asks them to give them directions. And those directions, they're diminishing in importance. That ability to ask and answer questions about directions. Man, that GPS is useful. So you don't want to spend too much time on something that pretty sure soon will not even be a needed conversational gambit. Here's another one just to think about. Tourism. You said vacations. A lot of dated textbooks still have dialogues for renting hotel rooms, dialogues for buying airplane tickets. Guys, that's all interpretive now. You go on the internet, you might have to be able to read it, but you're probably not going to be talking to anyone to do that. And if you are going to be talking to someone to do that, you're not in 101 or 102. You're down the road when you're really getting good, because otherwise you avoid conversation. As I like to tell my husband in Puerto Rico, people tell me that you need vocabulary to shop. I want you to know that that's not true. All you need is a credit card. He realized very quickly that I was quite adept at my shopping vocabulary, because you don't need any vocabulary to shop in modern cities. Now, in the market, yes, you do. So what did I do in my first French trips to markets? Think about it. Those of you that are here, you're doing the same thing, I bet. I looked at the price that was posted. I carefully counted it out. I told him how much I wanted. I blew the kilograms the first time. I got so many cherries, nobody could eat that many cherries. And then I just handed over the money and hoped it was right, and that he gave me the correct change. So even at that level, at 101 level, these are hard concepts. But now, with this behind me, I think I have a standards-based unit. I think I could say it's standards-based. But if you had said, well, we don't have any evidence of culture, when I teach it the next time, I'm going to have to beef that up. You can't change everything overnight. You can say, I think my course is weak on culture, and make a conscious choice this semester to work on that, but you can't change everything. So when Donna and I wrote the book, this was the visual that we created to go with the book. And we said that when you're thinking about curriculum in the big picture, this is what you have to be thinking about. If you could hold this image in front of you, every unit you design would be a good unit. So take a minute with your partner and explain that image to each other before I talk about it. And remember, I've got the slides up, so if you're taking pictures of the ones you really like, great. But they're all up there just in case. So what does that image say to you now that we've been talking about standards all morning? Weather. How do you get weather into a unit that lets students know themselves better, lets them know their community better, and lets them know the world better? Because really, if you tell me to look outside the window and what's the weather like, and I tell you it's hot, this is not all that engaging. So I've got to get that know myself, which is what's the weather like out there, but then know a community and know the world. In some cultures, we need to know whether it's summer or winter. These students do not necessarily understand what the equator does yet. There's a whole bunch of adults that don't have that fundamental understanding of weather. They think they're going to California, San Francisco in the summer, and they pack shorts and sandals. And they get there and they realize that was a really stupid thing to do because they don't understand weather other than locally. The modes float on the world because it's got to have a real world communicative purpose. The standards hold it together. What did you guys say about the eye? We defined it. What did you say? Any eye words come to mind? Information. Interconnection. I as in me. Anything else?
Integration.
And now there's this big buzzword out there called interculturality, that I can only really develop a perspective of interculturality if I explore topics from my perspective, the perspective of the people around me, and the perspective of others in the world. Interculturality comes through this. But other people have said interrelated, interconnected, immersion. I get to know myself better. There's a lot of things that I can be. But it's in the overlap that you start to learn about the world. Our traditional sequence of 101, 102, and 103 has been, this will be when you learn grammar and vocabulary. And when you get to the next tier, 200s, it'll start to get interesting. But we're losing them before they get there. So what we really need to do is be thinking in our lower courses, how are we doing this? How are we engaging them with the world from day one? And in high school, there's a tendency to say, well, 20 students got a 5 on the AP in Spanish. We're doing great. And then I'll say to a district, and how many were in Spanish 1? Oh, we had 620 start Spanish 1. And 20 were still there to get an AP 5? So it's success. Your success rate is the number who become proficient at some significant level in the language. And I think it's what we do in 101 that matters. So your very best teachers need to be in 101. And that's often not the case in university. We sometimes, and we do it in high school too, we put our less experienced teachers in our level 1 classes, and we lose the students. So every unit has to meet these 5. Let's talk about them a little bit. I said one earlier, communicatively purposeful. You're not, anybody in here running out of things to do at the end of the semester? Has anybody ever gotten to the end of the semester and said, I'm out of things to do? I don't know what to do the last 3 classes, I'm finished. No. So throw out everything that is not communicatively purposeful. If you hear yourself teaching something that they can't use out there, or teaching in a way that will never happen out there, get rid of it. So in my district, when we adopted a new book, we all sat down with black markers and we marked out sections of the book. I know it's sacrilegious, but it was the only way I could get teachers to stop doing it. Here's an example from level 1, direct object pronouns. Okay, I don't know where they show up in your course, 101 or 102, where are they?
101.
101.
Well, get rid of them. I know you don't control your syllabus, but let's just humor me for a minute. Give me a real world purpose, a real world way of requiring people to use a direct object pronoun out there at the novice level. How do you assess for direct object pronouns? Think about it. You assess probably by saying replace the noun with the direct object pronoun. But out there, nobody will ever ask them to do that. So I might ask you, did you like the book? This is a real world question. Do you have to answer it with a direct object pronoun? Can't you just say, what book? Oh, that book. Oh, yeah, best book I ever read. You can't force some things in. And sometimes we're trying to teach things that are too hard, too early. They're just not going to show up. It's not that you shouldn't teach them. It's just think about how communicatively purposeful it is. Let me give you one more example. Negative's really important, right? But not on a test to say make this positive sentence negative. Because I would never say to you, I'll give you a positive sentence, you give me the negative, okay? So I'm not saying it's wrong, but we've got to always teach in a communicatively purposeful way. And sometimes for something like direct object pronouns, that means we can wait until a later semester.
Okay, so I'm gonna object. I come from a Slavic family of languages. If you think direct object pronouns are difficult, don't even try. Because we have so many more complicated grammar concepts The direct object pronouns are the easy stuff. So, to me, I think, and this is one of the, issues with some of the, 100% in the native language or in the target language, is that all of this stuff has been developed around Spanish. Most of it was originally the communicative approach, and I find it, that there are certain things that don't work in classroom when there are 0 cognates.
I think it depends on the language. In my language, it's so easy.
I'm going to say that in a cognate language, it's much easier to
Right.
teach reading, not speaking. Speaking has no bearing on written language. So most of this research did not come from any one language. It came from first language acquisition being tested in second language acquisition. And I always encourage people, how many of you in here are parents or work with young children in your first language? To really watch a child learning language and think about how that brain, and Steven Pinker out of, I think he's MIT, The Language Instinct is a great read. It's a great read because he really goes through and develops the understanding of a language acquisition process, not so much dependent on any one language, but what's going on in the brain when you're learning. And so it's really interesting to think through, if we explain it in the English, we're missing the opportunity that we get in first language. We think we speed it up by giving the English explanation, but in reality, it's only been successful if you never have to review. So you have to really just step back and think. But I know every language is different, so I do respect what you're saying about direct objects might not be the one for you that can wait. And in some languages, maybe direct objects are so important, they have to be taught right away. But that happens to be one where my understanding of object pronouns is nouns always work. So that is one I pick on usually in a session. Then the other one we've done is culturally focused. And I'm not going to stay on grammar because we could debate grammar all day. We all love grammar in this room, remember? We all do. Culturally focused we talked about. Intrinsically interesting. This one I will, because I think you have a course syllabus and you can't change it. But within that course syllabus, you may have flexibility over what you read, what you do with it. You have to do this topic. So to the best of your ability, find something that 18, 19, 20-year-old is going to be interested in and want to read. It's what we do all the way up, right? Age-appropriate reading. My grandson, I will read anything to him he's interested in. He's 5. But he will not allow me to read to him if he's not interested. You all, as independent readers, you don't pick up anything you don't want to read. You have to be interested in it. So find those things that are of interest, which is going to be music. What are people their age doing in that country and language? The more you can bring in what are today's young people doing in that culture, the more they're going to be interested in your language. We talked about cognitively engaging. Just kind of points for you to think about. That city unit I showed has can-do statements. When I said, have you shared them, this is what I meant. So my syllabus for my high school course would have said, these are the things that you're going to be able to do by the end of this unit. And they would know that on your syllabus or from you. And then I feel like you've got a unit together that you can really start to deliver. And that's the what of teaching before you start to get into the how well, which is where we really have to get at the communicative modes. So before we switch to the communicative modes, I'd like you to think about 1 or 2 things, don't talk to anybody yet, that you want to remember from this first part. What are 1 or 2 things that have resonated with you that you want to carry into the work you're going to do this year, and jot those down. I'm treating you like my high school students.
So, before we go to the law, can you please briefly explain the relationship between the goals, the objectives that you wrote for us, that, you know, you'll be getting to, and the can-dos? What is the relationship between them? Because you remember the unit objectives that you gave us?
So when you went back to this,
That one,
see, this really reads nicely, but it's not specific enough to tell a student what they're supposed to be able to do. So ACTFL, in writing the can-do statements, which are on the wiki and which we're going to use more this afternoon, said break that out into what a learner can do. So by the end of this unit, all learners are going to be able to describe places in a city. All learners are going to be able to name public transportation and ways of getting around a city. And this is really discrete point, so that when I am in the target language 100% of the time, they are anchored in English if they get lost to see what they're supposed to be able to do. Because your point was very valid. They can get lost when I switch over to 90%. You know, you're going to see some of that when I switch into languages for some of the lessons. Does that help? So, but you all think, what are 2 takeaways that were of benefit to you? And the reason I'm making you write them, and I would suggest this certainly for your incoming freshmen, is that all incoming freshmen have mastered the art of the attentive face. Do you know what I mean by the art of the attentive face? That means that they are mature enough as students to make you think that they're working and thinking when they're not. So, by making them write their thinking, you have evidence that they're actually thinking. So that's why you're thinking. And you're not talking it, you're writing them for yourself, which means that 100% of the brains are engaged and not 50%. Want to remember? Anybody?
So, in your lesson, in this workshop, I took one great thing that I will be able to use when I will begin to teach my students. So, 5 C's. It is new for me.
New for you?
Yeah, new for me. And how to make connection while I write my lesson plan.
That's a
It's
biggie.
very useful and helpful for me.
And that's a big one. If that was new information for you, that is a huge thing to have as you start teaching. Much better to have it before than after. Other things, big or small?
I'm going to cross out the first week or days of the class that review the past. I said I'm old enough. I will.
My heart just feels so good when somebody shares that with me because I know what I've done for so many students when
You
I
have
hear
to be
that. But
honest.
it's like, oh, thank you. That, I'm so happy to hear that. Anything else?
It is very important to bear in mind how to map this presentational, interpretive, and interpersonal to the skills we are really developing, to what we are really training them to do.
To do out there.
Right, and that student-centered teaching can go as far as finding an appropriate partner for written assignments. It could be using the internet with Russian students.
Skype.
Yes, and number 3 is what we have just worked out because we originally we thought that having Andy as a native speaker of English to teach Russian would be an advantage, a stimulating thing for students, and now we are pretty sure we should role play a couple of real-life dialogues in Russian in front of the students.
And it will be interesting too to hear that what we found from our Star Talk summer students is that they actually value seeing non-native in the summer programs working as tutors and such, because they know that a non-native speaker has learned the language. Because if all they see is a native doing it, they can fall into that mindset of, this is a really hard language and I can't do it. But when they see someone like them that is actually acquiring and able to do it, it sends an entirely different message. So I think for you, you have a real advantage, like, hey, look at me, I'm just a regular old American too that learned Russian. And it's actually an advantage to those students to see that perspective.
And if you don't have a native speaker code AI, we usually in our class, because they may not see a non-native speaker Yoruba, we'll show them a videotape of a Yoruba, American speaking Yoruba.
An American speaking the
has
language.
learned at the university.
Because they're out there on YouTube.
That's right.
And you can use a good student in class to be that role model of a non-native speaker, to build confidence in others. If you can do it, I can do it.
Yes, you can, and you do have to be careful though, because there is this notion of if you see A students doing it, sometimes we're competitive in the United States, but it's a culture of competition, but when we realize we can't compete, we quit. That's our culture in the United States. So like all of the times that I thought I'd learned to play a musical instrument, it hasn't happened yet, because I just sort of felt like I couldn't do it. Or I tried to learn Chinese and I couldn't do it. So instead of persisting, so you have to be careful about holding that A student up on a pedestal, because there's a C student thinking, oh, I'm not smart enough. You know, so there's advantages and disadvantages.
But I'm wondering though, if you could bring a student from your third year class into your first year
Oh,
class.
absolutely.
'cause
That would
be
take
great.
care of
That would be
it.
good.
That would take care of it.
Yeah, definitely, because I was thinking also about that. So what about, for example, those students who got a chance, to go abroad and then, get the immersion of culture and then they came back, then you still, connected with, that you can invite in your class, for example, and then make them come over and discuss.
Right, and you may have
Sure.
some speakers of your languages here on campuses studying other things.
Exactly.
You know, they've come to IU as a business student, and they're a native speaker, or they're not a non-native speaker who's getting that. Look for that resource, so to be out there. Okay, well, hold those thoughts, and now I'm going to give you a test. So if you will go into your folder, and you will find this paper. How many of you have studied officially, or feel like you know the modes of communication? So there's a few that, you're somewhat familiar with.
Modes of communication.
The modes of communication.
I really might know that because they have been trained with the 4 skills.
Okay.
But the 3 modes of communications are great.
Okay. So the first mode of communication we're going to look at, if you have this sheet in front of you, is the interpretive mode of communication. And the interpretive mode of communication combines reading and listening and viewing. And we have to remember that really right now we might want to say reading, we might want to say viewing, reading, and listening, because that's really the order we acquire information now. We tend to go and watch something and listen at the same time. Then we might read the article, and the least used is pure listening. The radio, that type is the last one we usually really engage in. But it's any blend of those, any blend of those. So ACTFL has defined what the interpretive mode is and is not. So if you look at this box, this is what I want you to decide with your partner. Using content clues, would that be a characteristic of the interpretive mode or not? How many of you would say yes? Yes. What if I said, considering only the reader or listener's perspective? Interpretive mode or not? No. So look at all of them and with your partner decide which ones of these are characteristics of the interpretive mode, and check or circle them real quick. And then we'll talk about it. With me over one of them. I've just been looking over your shoulders. Here are the answers. The interpretive mode is not. It is not translation. Actually, translation is a no-no. It is a number one no-no. Never ask students to translate from English to the language or from the language to English.
Not even in the test.
Not even in a classroom.
And the test, the quiz.
Not even in a test or a quiz. Never. Never is an absolute word. Never. Never is what the research says. This is really hard a habit to break, guys. I can put my hand up. I gave those translate from English to French, French to English. Hold translation up to the real world. Hold it up. It doesn't work. And 101, 102 teachers, if you read and have them translate, they think they need to understand every word. We start to teach them that understanding a text means you understand everything. And the truth of the matter is, as a non-native reader of French, even today, every time I read, I learn new words. And if I thought I had to understand every word, I'd give up. And so what happens in 101, 102, 103, which is the equivalent of 1, 2, and 3 in high school, if you do the translation word for word, now we get to the course that gives them actual short stories, and they pretty much throw up their hands and say, I don't understand this. Because we haven't been teaching them to read for gist, for general meaning. We've forgotten how young learners in language actually process the interpretive mode. I'll give you a really specific example. I have read The Jungle Book, which I'm very proud of my grandson because this is his first quote-unquote chapter book going into age 5, has hardly any pictures. And now he's finally willing to listen to it. Now The Jungle Book is a bit violent, it's a child's version of it, but the word fought is in there. And I've read this one little short story probably 25 times because that's the way a child is. A child says, I want to watch this movie again. And you're like, little Nemo again? Could we please watch something else? Or spiders. Could I please read a book other than spiders? I'm so tired of reading about spiders. On about the 25th time, he said, what does fought mean? 25 times into this book. And he's asking me about a past tense. Now this is the language teacher grandma. I said, well, that's the past tense of to fight. And then I thought, what are you doing? This child is 5. I said, well, today we would fight, but yesterday those animals fought. You know, so he didn't care what fought meant until the 25th reading. And sometimes we need to relax a little. And we're going to look at what Axel says they can do at the novice level. And that's why we want to throw out translation. We also want to get rid of the questions following a reading that ask for trivial details. Who, what, when, where, why. Because all we're really doing then is seeing if they can regurgitate, if they can copy correctly, if they can hunt and peck and get the answer right. So that's why they put that on the list. We don't teach new vocabulary first. Imagine me teaching my grandson a list of 10 new vocabulary words so that we could read the book about spiders. We just read it. And then he starts to ask and acquire vocabulary. And when I read to my grandson at age 5, this is true for all of you in 101, what does he need? What kinds of books does a 5-year-old need?
Interesting.
Picture books. You're trying to read without pictures in 101? Good luck. You can't do it. You can't do it. They don't have enough language. They have to have images. So we'll talk about that. Without images, you're dead in the water in 101 if you want to stay in the target language. Somebody said to Donna when we were doing a workshop, I can stay in the target language 90% of the time if I'm prepared with pictures. If I'm not well prepared, I can't do it. Or if you're like me, you try to draw it. We do want them to consider not just their perspective as they read, but that's more of an upper level, considering the author's perspective. And we don't care if they read word for word. When you read, you pick it up knowing what you want to get out of it. And you very often don't read word for word in real life. You might pick up the old-fashioned newspaper or go online for your newspaper and see a headline and you'll be interested, but you might not read every word of the article. Sometimes I just read the first sentence of each paragraph. And that gives me the gist of that article, and that's enough. I don't need all the details. So that's why they say that. So let's look at what this is going to look like. So we have to work with authentic text. And in order to do that, we're going to adopt what Common Core says, because it makes perfect sense for us. We need a balance of fiction and nonfiction. And if we really want to find text that they can read in 101, 102, it's going to be on the nonfiction side. Because there's very little fiction that is accessible to someone who does not, that's cognitively appropriate. So it's that nonfiction side that's going to give us our authentic text. We want them to read it more than once. So we got to trick them into reading it more than once because they're still immature and they're going to say, we did that yesterday. I read it, I'm finished. So they're probably going to have to do more reading in front of you and not as homework. Because as soon as you tell them to do it for homework, you don't know if they're reading it. If you give them a worksheet to go with the reading, you really don't know if they read it because you don't know who did the work. So a lot of reading should be done in class individually for a few minutes to make sure that they're learning to read. We want them to read in order to give opinions, not read to regurgitate. Are any of you in book clubs? Anybody ever done a book discussion for fun? Nobody has time yet anymore because you're all still students?
Like Claudia.
So when you go to a book club, you do not retell the story, right? If you went to a book club to retell the story, you wouldn't go back. You go to a book club to discuss the characters and how it applies to your life. So we have to remember that it's not about the who, what, when, where, why regurgitation. It's what did we learn from the reading, and then we'll just ignore that. What is an authentic text? It is a text written by a native speaker. Raise your hand if you're a native speaker. Of the language you're teaching. The language you're teaching. It is a text written by a native speaker for native speakers. So if you write something for your class, it's not authentic. It might be a good stopgap. It might be the best you can do, but you can't call it an authentic text. An authentic text is written by native speakers for native speakers. Because as a native speaker, when you write for your students, you pull the punches. You say, I won't use that vocabulary word. I won't use that grammar. They haven't studied it yet. And we pull the punches when we write. So we have to think about that. The reason we want to go out and get authentic text is because, one, it's a whole lot more interesting than what's in your textbooks. It's real world, it has culture, and it has good grammar in it, most of the time. Not always, because if you pull something from a blog or TripAdvisor, if your country has a TripAdvisor in your language, you're going to see mistakes. But it really brings the world into the classroom. If I'm in my clothing unit and I use this article, non-French speakers, what do you think this is about? Don't volunteer if you're a French speaker or have French. Because you've got to try to figure out what this article is going to be about. We've got an image, we've got the advantage of cognate language. So what's it about, do you think?
Shoelaces?
Something about shoelaces, something new.
Tie the shoelace.
An invention, and what it basically says is we're not going to need shoelaces anymore with this invention.
Yeah.
And the article goes on to say that this was a crowd-funded, one of those that they got money for. This is a super strong magnet, so it's going to replace Velcro and shoelaces. So you're learning something, so it brings into that clothing unit something that's a little more relevant. ACTFL says, and so many of you are in that 101, 102, that's novice. The only reading they can do is highly predictable with strong visual support. So you're going to go out and you're going to find a lot of articles and listening that has no visual support. Because in the real world, it's disappearing because they're cognitively, they don't need visual support. So you're going to have to add visuals. You're going to have to go find images to put with the text to support it. It's a delicate balance. Who has read to a 4 or 5-year-old? This will be an interesting cultural question. We'll see if this is a cross-cultural phenomenon. What happens when you have a picture book and a young child on your lap, 3, 4, 5, and there's too many words on the page? What does the child do?
They would jump to the next page and see if they could find another
Yes,
picture.
and with violence, right? If you have a child on your lap and you're trying to read every word on the page and it's too many words, they actually get violent about turning the page. You put your hand here because you want to finish reading all the words. They put their hand there and they try to tear it. They want to turn it. So what do you do as the reader? You speed up if you can. That's your first. And what do you do second? You start paraphrasing. You shorten it. That's what we have to do in our first language courses. We got to find that delicate balance between just enough language and just enough visual support to keep the learner comfortable and engaged in reading and listening. What makes you want to read this article? The picture. If I had shown you this without the picture, it would have been like, it's too hard, I can't read it.
Yeah.
But now you can hardly help it. You want to know what it says. So, yeah, sumo fighters here. So what I would do in class is I would start with the picture. And I would get them to say everything they can about the picture. So that might be dad and babies, colors, holiday, whatever they can say, green, yellow, it doesn't matter, summer, whatever they can say. I want to know what they can say. Then I'll show them the title, which doesn't help at all because it says what's happening. So the title gives nothing away. I could, if they have a little more language, ask them to think about what's happening. Predict. Dad is mad. Baby is sad. Anything they can say is good. It's language. What it really says, and this is a sound word. This is another reason for using authentic text. Wang, wang. Just how you cry in French. It's very interesting. All those animals make those different sounds. And what it says is that this is a ceremony called Nakisumo. And it took place on a Sunday in Tokyo. And what it is that when they hold their babies up, if they scream loudly, they're healthy. So the louder a baby screams when they're held out, the healthier they are. So I like for young moms and dads to remember that. In the middle of the night at 3 in the morning, and the baby is screaming, they're healthy in Japan. So it's finding those. And where do you find them? You find them on Facebook. You go join your social media sites, because that's where that one came from. It came from French teachers on Facebook. Because the stories that go viral are the most interesting. So if you can find the source that has your viral videos and pictures, you have a rich source of language. You might not have thought of that as a family unit picture, but that's much more interesting than the family tree or the Simpsons. Because now you're learning about the world. And notice I'm a French teacher, and I'm reading about Japan. This is something we've been hesitant to do. We think that if I'm teaching this language, I should only focus on this language and culture. But our real mission is global citizenship. So the world is my curriculum. Anything teaches language. So if they learn about a holiday in Japan through French, great. So don't rule out works of art, music, etc., just because it comes from another culture, if the article is interesting and written in the language. So let me give you a more concrete example. Shopping. So I'm thinking, what can I do with clothing and shopping? Well, we have our International Day Without Shopping. How many of you knew there was an International Day Without Shopping? I don't believe such a thing should exist, but we do. And we have an International Day for everything. So see to what perspective your languages participate in the International Day of the Family, and the International Day Without Shopping, the International Day of this, that, and the other. We can do all of this consumerism stuff. We can talk about debt. We can talk about whatever. But I've decided that we're going to make it about clothes. Because that's what's in my textbook. Somebody said clothing comes up, what you wear. But I don't want to talk earlier, like I said, what do you wear, blah, 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 what color is it? So instead, on day one, I'm going to show you this video and ask you to think about the words you know. And there's only music, but I'll let you listen. Can I turn the lights down up here? Maybe. And I'll probably turn the music off because it gets annoying. No? Yes. Okay, that'll be fine. Now, if you're thinking like a 101 student in your language, what are some words that they know before you even taught this? Because this wouldn't be the unit you teach week 1 of 101. This will come up. So just call out words as you think of.
Colors, maybe?
Colors. That they know. Time. You might have already taught time.
Books.
Books. Girl.
Work.
Work. Remember, you can pause this video at any time to focus on any specific time or element. Profession. Now, I could care less about that song, so in class I just mute it. Because I don't want to deal with the words. The words weren't in my language. The video's powerful. Get rid of the words. I can use that in any class now. Okay, so she's finished making the dress. Pause it. We're looking at a world map, so now we'll know where Bangladesh is, which I guarantee you 50% of your students don't know, or more. It's time to shop. Now they really start to know words. And now they've got words like the actual clothing words, maybe if you pause it, if you want to bring them in and teach them. Figure out, they look, this is a, do you like, don't you like? Modern, old-fashioned, shopping mall, small store, big store. Where is she now? At the mall, at home. Men and women in this group can relate to this. The dress doesn't fit, it's too tight. At least you found a way to talk about something being tight. You really insist. No, now she's going to wear this other hideous thing, and that poor dress is in the trash can. You've got all the colors we can talk about. Do you like the colors? 4 hours of shopping, 3 months of dieting, 35 euros spent. And then this is in Catalan. So what I have to do is find out what that means and put it up in my language if I want to use it. But now what I have is an opportunity to talk about where do your clothes come from. And all you have to do now is stand up and look at the tags, and you're going to start to find out where your clothes come from, so that you're learning to say, my dress comes from, my skirt comes from, and you can plot it on a world map But what you've done cognitively is introduce a much more serious issue. In 101, you might not be able to talk about labor, because I think she works 16 hours a day if you watch the clock. You can go back and get that by rewatching. But it's a way of getting your 101, finding an authentic video and using it by pausing it frequently to introduce your vocabulary to get a real world context for anything you want to teach. So what happens when you want to stay in the target language? Because that is a problem. So this explains the brainstorming you can do. Because we don't do enough brainstorming with our students. We've talked about activation of prior knowledge, and a lot of you have said review. The number one thing that needs to be reviewed is not grammar, it is vocabulary. Because of the two, vocabulary is what allows you to survive in another culture. So as you watched it, I would have each of you keep an individual list of words. I would have paused it so you could write for a while and then continue watching. This is really hard to write and watch at the same time. When you finished writing your individual list, I would have you pair with a partner and compare your lists. You copy words that are on her list, you copy back and forth, and then we could do a group of 4, and then you can call out all the words you guys came up with, and I'll keep a running list. I'll write them, no spelling mistakes, no accents missing, clearly written so everybody can read it. If I tell you to go and write them, you'll make all kinds of mistakes, and I have to have a grammar lesson or a spelling lesson. I don't want to do that. So that tells you that process. Now, I want to watch it again and teach you some new words, and I want to stay in the target language. So one of the words I want to teach you, for example, is factory. So what I can say when I hit that scene, and I can pause it, and I can say, does she work in a factory or in a school? I know you know the word school. So you have to choose factory, and I'm teaching you what factory means without translating. I'm using a picture to teach it, but I'm not just doing the old ALM. Repeat after me, factory, 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 because that doesn't count for learning. There's no learning that happens through repetition of a word. It has to be in context. So by putting the word in context and saying, does she work in a factory or a school? Does she live in the United States or Bangladesh? Is she making clothes or computers? I'm teaching the new word in context. It takes 20 times in context to learn a word. You are teaching too much vocabulary in your courses. If you think about the number of hours you're with them and the number of words you hope they learn, you're way over what the brain, because we all do it. We try to give them way too much. So you have a way then to actually stay in the target language, but only because you planned the authentic text visual support piece. So turn to your partner, tell them one thing you got to keep in mind. When you try to design your lesson for the very first week of school, what are you going to be looking for an authentic text? Talk it over. Very first week, what's your authentic text?